Um, every writer is different. Every writer is their own personality, and they have their own strengths and weaknesses and their own personality. Um, learning to work with each writer is a different experience each time. It's really important to be on the same page and to understand where the writer wants to go, what type of story they want to tell, um, definitely where they're leading, and you can help them get there in the best way possible. Notes will vary um, from writer to writer. With most scripts that I review, even to this day, there's structural things. There's, maybe you want to change this into a page turn, or maybe you want to take these 2 pages and make them into a double page spread, or it might work better if this reveal happens 2 pages later or 2 pages earlier. So there's notes like that.
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders. This is a weekly podcast where we get to know the people behind the scenes of the comic book industry and get to know more about them as people, get to know about their work and how they view their work, and any tips and tricks that you can bring along to your work, to your business or career in comics. I have been really looking forward to this particular interview. This is somebody I have worked with in the past, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about the role of the editor in comics. This person is our first editor on the show. The role of editor is often an opaque one to the fandom of comics. Are they co-authors, advocates for creators, glorified secretaries? Today's guest has one of the most complete views of that role that anyone in the history of our medium has had. From intern to group editor to EVP/editor-in-chief, Mike Marts has touched every rung of that ladder. Beyond that, as someone who has worked on a team with Mike, I can tell you personally that he is generous, creative, kind, maybe a touch naughty. He is definitely someone you want on your team and in your corner. And it's truly my pleasure to introduce my friend, and probably yours, let's be true, Mr. Mike Marts. Hey, buddy.
Adam, how are you? I don't think I've ever had that many nice things said about me, in the lead-in on a podcast. So very flattering. Thank you.
Well, I like to, for the longest time on Facebook, I thought birthday messages would have been like if I could write your eulogy, that would be the time to do it. So now I get this, right? I get to talk about you like in front of you. So it's been fun. So yeah.
Save the file.
Let's look. Does everything behind you have your name in a masthead somewhere? Is that what we're looking at?
Well, okay. So if you look at the stuff that's like right here,
okay,
that's like a combination of Mad Cave and Aftershock. So basically, like the last 10 years of my life. So that
right.
all of that stuff definitely has my name in it. There's other cubbies, Stephen King and Dragonlance and conspiracy theories. Like, it's just all stuff I love to read. But
gotcha.
I don't think you can see it, but I've got my DC stuff over here and my Marvel stuff on this side.
What are you reading right now? This is not in my list of questions, but now you got me curious. What is what's on your bedside table right this second?
So right now I'm reading 2 books. One is Jade City by Fonda Lee. It's a urban fantasy book, which I'm really into. About 300 pages in, loving that. And then I'm reading like an old school high fantasy book, Pawn of Prophecy, and that's by I think Dave Eddings.
Yes.
And then with comic stuff, I usually like put myself to sleep each night by going onto the Marvel Unlimited app and rereading stuff from my youth. And the past like 2 months or so have been John Byrne themed. So so I read his Alpha Flight run, and I'm currently doing his West Coast Avengers run. And then I'm going to go into Namor, and then after that, Fantastic Four. So
Oh, that's wonderful. Just like going back to the source, right?
Uh, It is, yeah, and it's fun because you get to see what stories stand the test of time and which ones are still relevant and which ones still
Yeah.
seem like they've got the juice. And then there's a few others that you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this was definitely a comic created in the 1970s. It feels dated.
I was never a huge Byrne fan. I have to admit, like there's certain of those creators that everybody seems to love that I'm like, but up until this point, I wouldn't be vocal about the fact that I'm just not crazy about Chris Claremont. I just don't get it. Kind of gives me a headache. But so what would you say? Like, what is since you're reading it now? Like,
Yeah.
what jumps out at you as this is still as relevant today?
Burns' approach to storytelling is really basic at its core, but so I don't know, so traditional, and his characters feel like real people. Each one of them has a distinctive voice. He is very adept at the subplot, weaving things in, introducing something in one issue, and it doesn't fully pay off until 2 years later. And I'm not sure if he developed that all on his own or if that was kind of a side effect, a result of working with people like Claremont for so long. But Byrne is a very dependable read. Like you can depend. If you go
Yeah.
in, you know you're going to get 100% quality from start to finish, and he's not going to slack off on any page. So it's been a fun trip down memory lane. I'll say that.
Awesome. Well, that's excellent. Well, I love hearing that. All right, so let's begin. Our researcher was on vacation this week, so I had to go to ChatGPT for your life story. It says here that you graduated from West Point, then got your master's from Dope University, and not before studying demonology. I don't know if I'm getting that right, from Miskatonic University. That's all right, yeah? Yeah.
Well, so man, that's funny. So I went to West Point.
Okay.
But I was going to turn on the light here.
Oh,
So
look at that.
yeah, much better. Yeah, I started off my college career at West Point. I went there for basic training, and that was during the summer, so it was before like the academic year started. And I would say several days into my journey at West Point, I came to the self-realization that a military life was not for me. The
That is the most political way of saying this sucks.
Right?
I'm out.
Yeah. So at that point in time, the West Point career was 4 years at West Point, like college and also military training, and then afterwards it was 5 years of active service in the Army as a second lieutenant. So I just after being there a few days, I was like, I don't think I want to devote 9 years of my life to this. So I left West Point and
How long did you stay? How long were you there?
I was there probably a total of 13 days. And I don't think I've ever told this story on a podcast. That's crazy. But I when I decided to leave, it took a lot of courage for me to go to my squad commander and like squad leader and tell him I wanted to leave. I got put into this like empty barracks with like 10 other kids, and it was 10 other kids that wanted to leave as well.
Yeah.
And by the end, I was there stuck in these transitional barracks for like maybe about a week, and by the end of the week, those 10 people had grown to like 30 people. So it's like the dropout rate there is pretty intense. It's like one out of every 3 students will end up leaving West Point.
So hang on. I'm telling you, this is a pitch right here. This that week of being in this with the same guys for 10 days, and then or I suppose girls too, but
yeah,
like
guys and girls, yep.
all in these barracks, and you're all the dropouts.
and now I remember it was called the transient barracks. The transient
Oh
barracks.
man.
What's funny is like, I was stuck there for like a week or so with these people, and you get to know them really well because we weren't
Yeah.
really allowed to leave these barracks. We were kind of sequestered there for night and day, and we were allowed to kind of get into our one pair of civilian clothes. Like we only had one pair of civilian clothes. So
Uh-huh.
this one kid gets into his civilian clothes, and his T-shirt is Wolverine and Nick Fury, the Scorpio connection. And I'm like,
You're my guy.
yeah, comics? He's like, yeah, man, I love Nick Fury and Wolverine. Um, so yeah, there was some connecting, some bonding that took place there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Um, no, but I ended up getting my degree at College of New Jersey, formerly known as Trenton State College, and I left there with a degree in journalism.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
deal.
And you mentioned something else there too, the Miskatonic University.
Honestly, I do. We did actually do some research on you, and this
so
came
funny.
up as a very serious line, and I was like, "This is a joke. How did this get through?"
Well, I got suckered into it. I suckered myself into it. Like at one point in time, I was like, I'm going to see if there's some courses I could take on the occult, on demonology. It's just a side interest of mine, a little hobby.
Uh-huh.
And so I started looking online. Maybe there's some, correspondence courses or whatever. And I found this place called Miskatonic University. I'm like, oh shit. Like, they had a whole course load. And I'm going through the college's website, and they got, full departments devoted to all these interesting things, the history of witchcraft and spells and potions. Like I felt like I was applying to like Hogwarts or something. And the punchline, of course, is that I was not that big of a H.P. Lovecraft fan at the time, so I had no idea that Miskatonic University was actually a fictitious university that Lovecraft had created. And probably about after an hour of going through this website, I stumbled onto some part of the page where I was like, oh, this is an actual place that I can study from. It's part of a book.
This is incredible. I'm so glad we landed here.
Yeah.
This is really good. This is like you walked into the superhero supply company here in Brooklyn and like, all right, I want superpowers. Let's go. I'm ready to fly, bitches. Yeah.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So at that point, I became a little bit of a Lovecraft fan.
That's what turned the corner for you. Right. Oh my God. That is awesome. All right. Well, we're going to return to Dope University, which I also nestled in there. We're going to come back to that a little later. Okay. Yeah. So I do have a moment we're going to get to that. But before we do, let's talk about your family. Where does Mike Marts come from? You're a Jersey? You just a Jersey boy?
I'm a Jersey boy. I grew up in Central Jersey. Central Jersey is a thing. But I think out of all my 52 years of living on this planet, I lived in New York maybe 3 years, and the rest of the time I've been in Jersey, and most of the time in North Jersey in my adult life. Pretty typical New Jersey suburban upbringing. I've got 3 brothers, 3 sisters, so it was always a huge house. My older sister, Erin, she's my stepsister, and when I met her, she's the one who had this enormous collection of comic books. So she was kind of my gateway, my tour guide into the comic book realm.
What was she a fan of? Like, what was she exposing you to?
She had everything under the sun. So she was primarily a Marvel zombie, and that's what I ended up becoming. She read a few DC things like Teen Titans, but it was mostly Marvel, and no surprise, mostly X-Men. X-Men was her main thing, and X-Men became my main thing. But she had everything else. She had Spider-Man, she had Dazzler, she had Marvel Team Up. Before her dad and my mom got married, we'd go over to their house, and I would just spend hours in their living room. I'd arrange a little stack of comics for myself, and I'd go sit in the corner and I'd just read through all these comics. So
Oh, that is the sweetest. I mean, there have been a couple times in my life, both as the child of a divorced parents and having gotten a divorce with kids as myself. Like you see that transition where kids become siblings. I really like that. How much older is she than you?
He's 3 years older than me, and then I have a
Okay,
stepbrother who's the same age as me. So, and both of them were super into comic books. So, like, meeting them was serendipitous. It was, meant to be. I always say, if not for my parents getting divorced, I wouldn't have the life
right.
that I've had. I probably wouldn't have that hardcore interest in comics. I don't think I would have gotten, worked in the comic industry. Maybe I'd be a, military commander somewhere. Um, but you know, uh, if not for them,
Or you would have
I
dropped
wouldn't be.
out after getting through West Point.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
beyond that, just yeah, I'm very much a Jersey cat.
I think a lot about where I would have been without comics, and it has given me kind of a direction in a way that I was a little directionless before I found it. So I can definitely see that. That's really wonderful. Is that your dad, and did your dad marry their mom, or the other way around?
My mom and their dad.
Okay, gotcha,
Yeah,
gotcha. And
yeah.
and what do they do? Like, what are their backgrounds? Your parents?
So my mom was a social worker. Everyone's
Okay.
retired now, but she was a social worker, and my dad was an architect by trade.
Oh, right on.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah,
A little bit of the arts then also in the family. That's
yeah.
I can see that.
Both of my parents were. I say my dad was always very creative, and my mom has always had a very liberal mindset towards things in life. And I think the two of them together with creativity and certain viewpoints really helped to shape the person that I became in my adult life.
Yeah, I have no
Yeah.
doubt. That sounds about right. All right, so I want to kind of jump forward a little bit. At some point, it sounds like you started working in a comic shop, which we all have at some point, right,
Yeah.
in our
Right.
lives.
I know. I
How
feel
old
like
were you?
it's a dues that you have to pay along the way, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to work
Yeah.
the counter. You have to
Right.
learn what it's like dealing with comics fans and not just
Right.
being one, right?
Right.
Um, where? So this was in Jersey. Does this shop is it still around?
It's not still around. No, it was a great shop. It was called Star Spangled Comics. It was in Greenbrook, New Jersey. It unfortunately went away during that wave of when there was the distributor wars. Yeah,
Yeah,
with Heroes World and Capital and Diamond and everything, and
late '90s, that
late
era.
'90s Marvel implosion. Yeah, so unfortunately they went away. But the guy who ran it, Tom, he was fantastic. He had such a good back issue collection and a lot of great wall books. I started working there, I think, when I was 19, maybe, like freshman in college, maybe.
Yeah.
I worked there for most of my college years. It was the type of thing where like I knew I wanted to work there, and every other time I went in, I would ask him, "Hey, is there a job available? No. Is there a job available? No." And eventually, I changed cars, and I went from having this tiny little Honda to having a really big, um, like Jeep Cherokee. And he saw that in the parking lot, and he was like, "You still want that job?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." He's like, "Great, because I can use you to drive up to uh, the Heroes World distribution center to pick up the comics each week because I'm tired of doing it." And I was more than happy to do that. I was like,
Ah! It wasn't hiring you; it was hiring your Cherokee, right?
right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
exactly. So yeah, the Cherokee came in handy going to pick up the comics, and that's when comics were coming out on Fridays, but
yeah.
then they kind of introduced the Wednesday pickup somewhere around there, early '90s, and so I was going up twice a week. I was going Wednesdays and I was going Fridays, depending on what the books were. Um, so yeah, exciting times. And I mean, when I was working at that shop, that's when X Force #1 came out, Spider Man #1, X Men #1, Death of
Dude.
Superman. That was that whole
Yeah.
all the Image stuff. all the Valiant stuff.
Yeah.
It was
So 90, 92, 93 in that era. Yeah.
exactly. Yep, 90 to 93. Yeah.
So you're picking up those cases of Death of Superman and the cases of Bloodshot on the same day, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Multiple copies of everything.
Yeah, I hear you. We're going to talk about your time at Wizard here a little bit, but Fred Pierce, who I think you must have worked with there, and I definitely worked with, loved to
Yeah.
tell the story about how they positioned Bloodshot #1 to come out on the day that Death of Superman came out, so that when you went to go buy Death of Superman, you also saw another #1 on the shelves, which is why it did so well. Yeah,
Brilliant move. I mean, I think
yeah,
a bunch of other publishers might say like, oh, like let's avoid
yeah.
Death of Superman Day because we don't want to be, competition. But you think about it, who goes into a comic shop and only buys one comic? You're always going to
Right.
buy multiple comics. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a great move. Yes, and Fred was my boss at my time at Wizard. I learned a lot of hard lessons working under Fred. Um, I think at the time I was probably a little intimidated by Fred, and yeah, I was learning my way when I was at Wizard. But I've told him several times, like, since then, in the past, that so much of what he kind of tried to instill into me during my time there, I still use in my day to day working these days.
Give me an example. I'd love to hear.
So, I mean, it's well documented. My time at Wizard, I was struggling. I had finished like an assistant editor job at Marvel, and I went back and I finished my college degree. And after I finished my college degree, I would want to work anywhere in comics. It didn't matter where. And after a few failed interviews at DC, DC like turned me on to Wizard, and it was Patty Jarris in the DC marketing department. She recommended me to Jim McLaughlin at Wizard. And Jim was at the time moving from being the promotions manager to being their full time like staff writer, their like lead
Yeah.
writer. So I went up and interviewed with Jim, and he was like, "Yeah, you great. You know the industry. You know people. You know comics. Come up and be the promotions manager." It turns out I was not very good at promotions, and I think I started to learn. I knew that I wasn't very good at it, like a few months in, and then I think the rest of the company started understanding, like Mike's probably this isn't the job for him. So my tenure there was fairly short. It was about 9 months or so. Um, but Fred was a tough boss, and
Yeah.
he didn't want to see me fail. He wanted to see me succeed, and a few times he would come in for the kind of come to Jesus talk, and here's what we got to do to get back on track and everything. And one of the big lessons he instilled into me is, he would point at all the different projects I had lined up on the wall. And he said, look at each of these projects. And when you leave the office each day, can you say to yourself that I moved each one of these projects as far as possible, as far as it could go that day? And if you can say that, then, you're doing your job. And at that time, I couldn't admit to that. I couldn't say that. But that's something I carried with me all the time. It's something I still carry with me. And it's something that I try to instill into my staff and the editors that have worked with me, whether it's Mad Cave or DC or Marvel. Just the idea that, we have all these projects, all these multiple things we're working on. Can you move each one as far as it can go that day?
That's really good. That's
Yeah,
really good. That's
that's
really
that's Fred Pierce 101.
all right. So I did work with Fred for, I don't know, many years, and I find myself quoting him a lot. Someday I'd love to, Fred, if there by chance you're watching this, I'd love to have you on the show at some point. But one of my favorite Fred gems was, there was a moment where I was struggling, and he said he told me that most of your troubles are going to come either from work or from home. He says, in most things in life, if you're really giving, you're being honest and you're giving effort, most things are going to resolve themselves. Most of the trouble is going to resolve at one point or another. You might get fired, but it'll resolve, right? You might end up getting a divorce, but it will resolve. He says the worst thing that can happen though is that work and home crumble at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're having trouble at work, make sure home is buttoned up. Make sure everybody's happy and okay and having your attention. If you're having trouble at home, make sure work is thrilled with your work, right? And he's
Great
right. I mean,
advice.
I had gone through a period where everything in my life crumbled all at once because I wasn't doing any of it right, you know? So yeah, he is a gem of a man. Well,
He
that's
is. He
wonderful.
is. A lot of wisdom.
I do want to back up. I did, but it is interesting to me how many people in comics now came from that period in Wizard. Lots of people I've interacted with, you know.
Oh yeah. Some of my best friends to this day are people that I met at Wizard during the year that I worked there.
Yeah. You mentioned Jim, I know Mel Kylo,
Oh,
Steve Blackwell. I mean, there's on and
yep.
on and
Buddy
on.
Scalera and Darren Sanchez are
Oh
two
yeah.
of my best
Yeah.
friends, and both those guys are from that era. Maria
Yeah.
Capello, I still talk to this day. A lot of people.
Yeah.
All those Toy Fair guys, and yeah.
Right. Well, and like
Brian Cunningham.
whole. Yeah. Oh, Brian Cunningham. That's right.
Yeah, Brian
Yeah.
Cunningham. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's right.
he's one of my good friends in the industry, and I met him back then. Yeah, the day I met him it was my first day at Wizard, and it was funny. I went into his office, and he shared it with Pat McCallum, the late Pat McCallum, great, both great guys, Brian and Pat. And I sat down, and of course, I'm intimidated. I'm sitting with the editor in chief and the main editor of Wizard, and they're like, "Yeah, we have a few important questions for you." And I'm like, "Okay, all right." And I'm like, "All right, I hope I studied my Wizard history well enough to answer these questions."
Don't fuck it
And
up, Mike. Don't fuck it up.
right, Pat's like, with toilet paper, are you a pull from the top guy or a pull from the bottom guy? And, and that just kind of set the stage for what I was to expect at Wizard. But
Well, all
yeah.
right. So you mentioned a time. I want to get back to pre-Wizard, right? So you mentioned so you're working in this comic shop, and my understanding is that during this period, you reached out to Marvel and said, "How do I submit stories?"
Yeah.
Which, by the way, how Jim Shooter came to be Jim Shooter was, how do I submit stories? You get the guidelines, and then you just start sending pitches. How many pitches do you think you sent?
Total between 15 and 20, I think. My goal was like one per week. And I would sit at my dad's typewriter, and, the submissions could only take up one page. You couldn't go more than a page.
Right.
And in that one page, you had to get a lot of information across, what the setup was, who the character was, the motivation, what's the inciting incident, how do things resolve, what's the can't must situation. There was all these different elements that you had to get in there. So I studied it and got it down to a science. And I would just keep submitting and submitting, and I would get the rejection letters back in the mail sometimes. But eventually, through a comic shop connection, one of the customers at the comic shop was Mark McKenna, and he was a industry inker for both Marvel and DC, and he was a one-time Marvel bullpenner, one of John Lemieux's writers. And such a nice guy, super sweet guy, and he lived in my town. He would come into the comic shop, and he knew about my aspirations to become a writer. And he said, "I'll hand deliver your stories to Marvel and try to get some feedback." So I got actual feedback from two editors that I remember, Ralph Macchio being one and Fabian Nicieza being the other. And both guys gave extremely insightful advice on my writing and critiqued it in a nice, constructive way. And that kind of opened my eyes to, these editors there, these are the type of things they do. They're not just there to proofread a comic book. They are steering the course of the stories. They are selecting the writers and the artists. They're behind the scenes, but they are, a very important piece of the puzzle. And that's when I kind of shifted my thinking, not fully away from writing, but certainly more towards editorial.
Something
And
very
then,
seemingly more attainable, right?
yeah, exactly. And they had an internship program, which I applied to, and then ended up getting a spot. And to me, that was, this is how I'm going to get into the industry. And it was, the internship worked out great. I did one over the summer between my junior and senior year, and then I stayed on for an extra semester, just kind of, trying to.
Just keep your foot in their door, right?
Yeah,
Keep moving.
exactly.
Yeah.
Keep my face in there and everything. And yeah, eventually an opening happened in the same office that I was an intern for, an assistant editor spot. And yeah, started there late '93. I think it was on my 22nd birthday. And it was also like the same day as the Marvel Christmas party. So I got to become a Marvel assistant editor, and I got to meet Stan Lee on the same day at the Marvel Christmas party. And
Wow.
So he was making the rounds, like, kind of going around and like talking to
Being
everybody,
Stan.
taking hands and being Stan and everything.
Yeah.
And he came up to me and two of my friends. We were, kind of hanging out, and he was like, he looked at me. He's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, Stan, I'm the assistant editor on Iron Man." And he goes, "You're doing a great job." I was like, "Thanks." And like, I knew he had no idea whether or not my job performance was good or bad. Especially since I just started that day. But I was just so happy, that Stan, I got Stan's blessing, that he knighted me.
That's right. You're doing a great
Right?
job. I got the chance to meet Stan, I think 3 times, and what the thing that caught me off guard about Stan was how much he was Stan all the time. Like it was seemingly never a moment that he wasn't on. He was Stan fucking Lee every minute of the day, seemingly.
Oh,
You know?
yeah,
Yeah, incredible.
yeah. Maybe a year after that, we were at the Marvel picnic, which was like in the summertime, and there was a big softball game going on, and Stan got up to bat, and like, I'm not sure how old was it this time, but definitely in his 70s. And like, he's up at the plate, and they pitch it to him, and he just cracks it, and I mean, I don't remember what, but could have been like a double or something like that, and he's running to first base, and he trips and falls, and yeah, and like there's just this collective gasp, like the entire fairgrounds just goes silent, and he just, in Stan fashion, just kind of like does a quick roll and like bops back up and stands on first base, and it's like, "I'm okay," and everyone's like, "Stan."
Yeah, I believe that. Oh, yeah, wow. Tell me, so you are there, you become an intern, and you come back for another apparently unprecedented second internship. That leads to a job as an associate or assistant?
Assistant editor.
Assistant
Yeah.
editor. And you're there. Is that what was the final that session at Marvel? Because if I'm reading this right, you've been to Marvel 3 times. Is that right?
3 tours of duty. Yeah.
Okay. So your first tour, what's the highest you achieve at that point?
So I left as an assistant editor. So that was
Okay.
like that was my rank the entire time I was there, and almost the entire time there, I was in what was kind of the West Coast Avengers Force Works office. It was
Gotcha.
Iron Man, it was War Machine. A little bit later, Fantastic Four and all the various Fantastic Force, Fantastic Four Unlimited, Fantastic Four Unplugged. And then towards the very end, I mean, this is a period of time where each Christmas or each New Year's there was a big round of layoffs.
Yeah.
And I survived each round of layoffs probably because I was making no money at all. I didn't cost the company anything. but towards the end, my final year there, it was right after um, the Heroes Reborn deal was made, and the main Avengers books went over to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, and there was a big reshuffling of books and assignments and everything, and I got reassigned to. I was working under two of the X-Men associate editors. Um, so towards the end, I was working on other stuff. Punisher. I was working on Excalibur, I think. Um, so
Okay, so the couple things before we leave Marvel here. So this is pre bankruptcy Marvel, right? So
yeah,
we're in
maybe like
Perlman
a
time.
yeah Perlman time, and it's maybe a year or two before bankruptcy.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you're there through, you said, rounds of layoffs, right? You've seen that culture. You've seen culture
two big ones. Yeah,
before, right? You've
yep.
seen the culture before. What was? I mean, you did two tours after. Just by comparison, we'll talk about later Marvel then. But now dealing with what was the kind of what did that feel like? What is the culture of Marvel during that period? If you
Well,
can sum it up, I don't know. It's a
when I
broad
walked,
question.
no, it's a great question. When I walked in as an intern, it was the place you wanted to be. It was just it felt like a party every day. You know,
Hmm.
there were 60 people in editorial. Um, everyone was happy. Um, it was after the Image departure, so
Okay.
they lost a bunch of the big artists, but books were still selling really well.
Yeah.
And the company was spending money and everything. You know, there were big Christmas parties, the picnics, whatever.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Um, it was the place you wanted to be. And there was always new freelancers just walking in the door that as a young person, you're like, oh my God, there's Walt Simonson. I'm getting to shake his hand. There's Al Williamson. Um,
Dude.
you know, there's Marie Severin, like just legends walking
Yeah.
in and meeting and dropping off pages. And they're
Yeah.
looking at you like, like I have some authority or something. You know, you're Walt Simonson. I'll do
Yeah.
whatever you want me to. It was a great time. With each subsequent year after that, and each round of layoffs, it just got sadder and sadder. You know, the lights, people just had the lights off all the time. It was just, and that really reflected like the
Oh, so
mood
it's
of
literally
the
getting
place.
dimmer. It's less than. Oh, that's.
It is. It really
Oh,
sucked the life out of people. And my boss at the time, he was let go, and he was like my mentor. So I took that really hard. A very long time Marvel staffer, Jack Abel, who was an artist and an inker and then a proofreader. Um, he passed away like on near his desk at Marvel,
oof.
and it was a few months before Mark Grummel passed away. But you could tell with Mark, it was just you know the energy and the life was coming out of a lot of people,
Yeah.
and that's when I kind of said, well, I still have this one semester of college I have to finish. I should go do it now because I don't know what the future has in store because there were whisperings of bankruptcy. You didn't think the staff could get any smaller, but there were still whispers of further layoffs, which thankfully didn't happen. But there was so much uncertainty, and that was
Yeah.
just like in the space of 2 or 3 years, that all changed very quickly. And yeah, so I left. I went back and finished my degree.
So one of the things, the themes that I was seeing as I set up the top of the show here, is kind of the definition of what an editor is, and so I'd love to just, if you don't mind, take little core samples. If you can go put your head back into assistant editor Mike Marts's body for a moment, and what does he think an editor's job is? What is his impression of that world, that career?
I mean, at that stage, so much of it is about the physical assets, the trafficking of the materials and learning the different stages of the assembly line of comics. So, learning just what to do, when a plot comes in. Okay, well, a plot comes in. You and your editor sit down, you read it, you make notes, you compare notes, you send them back to the writer, you get a revision. And each step along the way, whether it was the pencils or the inks or the lettering or the post-production, those were all individual steps along the assembly line, along the conveyor belt. And a lot of the assistant editor job at that point in time is learning that and perfecting it and not getting it wrong. And this is also, when I started, the computer era of comics had not begun.
Right.
So
you're still moving physical pages around and physical coloring layers and the whole nine, right?
Everything. Yeah. Lettering was on the board. Coloring was done on 8x11 pieces of special Finch paper. It was, and there's paste ups. We had whole people in the bullpen in the Marvel production department that would do paste ups on the paper, on the boards, lettering corrections, art corrections. So it was very much a physical thing. And your day didn't really start until FedEx arrived, because FedEx arrived and you get 5 boxes, and one is from Tom Morgan and another one's from Dave Ryan and another one is from, Gene Colan. And, you take out the boards, you make photocopies, you get them ready to send on to the next step, whatever that is. So when FedEx arrived, that's when the day began, unless you had some UK talent.
Right.
We didn't have much in the way of international talent at that time. You did, but it was few and far between. So it was either, US based talent or UK based talent. And my office always had a few writers in the UK, like Dan Abbott and Andy Lanning. So maybe I could get in some phone calls to them before FedEx arrived.
Right.
But, the assistant editor job, it's a lot about the assets, the physical things that you're touching and what to do at what stage.
Right.
Very basic comics creation 101.
That's actually, I'm glad you talked about that, because I think there is something when I started understanding I came up from the sales side and just worked my way in through sales and marketing. And it wasn't until much later on that I got involved at all in the production side. And I was always surprised at the fact that the editors really spend so much time, as you said, like your team will sit and read whatever stage this is, and everyone gives notes. And then you essentially boil that down to whatever the note is that's going back to the creator. Typically, that's been my experience. And it sounds like that's how you guys were working. And it really kind of does become a conversation of the whole of, is this working? So thanks for bringing that up. So, okay. So then you go and you get your journalism degree. You go to Wizard. Do you get fired from Wizard? Am I getting that right?
I do.
Okay, good.
I most certainly did. I got let go.
Did you do anything particular? Was there anything good you got fired for?
No, there was no one specific thing.
Okay.
But it was, really what I said earlier. I knew I wasn't the right person for the job, and that I wasn't very good at promotions and publicity. And and they learned that as well. And I think it was like San Diego of that year. I was San Diego of 97, and I was at the Wizard booth, and my counterpart at Top Cow, the promotions person at Top Cow,
who was that?
He came, Kate Sherwood.
Okay.
And she had come over to me and said, "Hey, you may want to know that, like, Wizard was inquiring with me if I might want your job." So I was like, "Thank you for telling me." And so it was July, and I think I got let go in September. So there was about, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks of me knowing I was in limbo at Wizard. They ended up hiring a guy who became my new boss, and essentially they hired him to take my spot. But
Yeah.
for whatever reason. I don't know why they just didn't let me go. Maybe, they wanted him to learn a little bit with me, whatever I could impart.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah, then I got let go.
all right.
So at this point, I'm like, my career in comics is over. It's done.
Oh.
Uh, I know I go home that night. I talk to my girlfriend. I'm, really, really stressed out, really upset. And, I'm sure she reassured me or whatever. The next morning I wake up, I don't know what I'm going to do. And the phone rings and it's Jimmy Palmiotti. And I got to know him and Joe Quesada really well when I was at Wizard. One thing Wizard was great for was expanding my Rolodex, expanding my address
Sure.
book.
Yeah.
I got to meet so many people, and Jimmy said to me, "Hey, Acclaim Comics, formerly Valiant Comics,
Mm-hmm.
um, they are hiring for an associate editor. Maybe he said assistant. I'm not sure. And it's with Fabian Nicieze, and I knew Fabian from my Marvel days. He's like, if you go down and interview for it, the job is probably yours." And I was like, wow, perfect. So I go down, I meet Fabian at the New York Acclaim Comics office, and I somehow talked my way into making it an associate editor spot, which he did. I don't know if he gave me any extra money, maybe he didn't. But
Yeah, right. He gave you a title, but
I
no
just
extra
felt
money. Yeah.
I felt like at that time I'd worked as an assistant for 3 years, like maybe I earned the associate spot, and Fabian says, "Listen, I don't know if we're going to be in the New York location in 6 months. I don't know if the company itself is going to be around in 6 months, but if you want the job, it's yours." And at this time, it's the late '90s. It's the distributor stuff.
Oh yeah.
A lot of companies are on the downhill run. Acclaim Comics, it's everyone knows the story. Acclaim spent whatever $6.5 million on or Acclaim Entertainment spent $6.5 million on Acclaim Comics. Overpaid for sure. And the company itself was not doing that well. So almost to the day, 6 months later, Fabian has to call everyone into the conference room, or maybe it's a big email, I forget. But he's like, "Hey, we're closing down the New York office. We're moving out to Long Island, to where Acclaim Entertainment's headquartered, and we're reducing the staff from 30 people to 8." And fortunately, I was one of those 8. But now, instead of commuting from New Jersey into the city, I'm driving from New Jersey out to Long Island every day.
Ugh. Where in Long Island is this?
Glen
Do you know?
Cove, so
Glen
not
Cove.
too
Yeah.
far out. Nassau
Yeah.
County, North Shore.
Is Walter Black there at this point?
So that's funny. Did you get an email from Walter today?
No. Why?
Okay.
Did you get one?
I did.
What?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I should.
We can talk about this after we stop
right.
recording.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil his news over a podcast. But anyway, yes. So Walter wasn't there when I first got there. But what ended up happening is, like, the 8 of us that went out there, we got out there and we're like, all right, we're going to give this a go. It's a big party. We're
Sure.
trying to mesh ourselves into the Acclaim Entertainment corporate world. But we were just like these freaky comic guys. Little by little, those 8 people, one by one, were like, I'm out of here. Like, I ain't doing this. I'm not
This is not a
commuting to
real
Long
thing.
Island. Right.
Yeah.
And eventually it was just like me, another editor named Omar Banmali, and our production guy. And it was just like the 3 of us.
Yeah.
And so I guess, Fabian left, and we had another executive editor who left. Our salesperson left. Our marketing person left. So we're just like these 3 guys, like, making comics, which was great for on-the-job training, because suddenly
I was about to say, there's nothing you're not touching at this point.
I'm touching everything. I'm doing all the editorial work. I'm doing some of my production work. I'm talking to the printers. I'm doing everything. But it's at this point in time that the the Acclaim corporate people, they're like, maybe we need some like authority figure to come in here and just kind of guide these lost sheep of the Acclaim Comics crew. And they
Yeah.
ended up hiring this publishing executive, publishing expert, a consultant, and his name was Walter Black.
Mm-hmm.
And Walter came in, and Walter had come from real publishing, like traditional
Right.
publishing, and he was thinking, what are these comics things? But yeah, we taught Walter comics, and we became friends with Walter. Walter was definitely our den father.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I spent a lot of great lunches with Walter
Oh yeah. Me too.
during
Yeah.
during those times.
Walter is he's just like, he's this tall, thin, curmudgeonly just means like, I don't know, he's just got a real like kind of cowboy like energy to him. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
yeah,
Right?
yeah. My mother said the same thing. I I'm skipping ahead, but at one point I was loving the claim so much that I moved out to Long Island, and Walter helped me move into my apartment,
Yeah.
and my mom got to meet him and everything. She's like, he's like a cowboy.
I don't think I've ever said that out loud actually, but he's just got this. He really does kind of have this kind of Clint Eastwood, just kind of never. I mean, you might get a chuckle out of him.
Right,
That's it. It's
right.
just, yeah. I really love that guy.
Oh, me too.
I
Me too.
hope
I
he's doing
learned.
well. I look forward to hearing about this email after we stop recording.
Yes,
Um,
yeah. I learned a lot from Walter, and a
yeah,
lot of stuff I learned from Walter was like just hardcore traditional printing
business.
stuff. Like,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, business stuff, like how to do a profit and loss statement, how to forecast
Mm-hmm.
numbers, how to do a press check, like
Mm-hmm.
just all just fantastic publishing stuff. And I
Yeah.
just like a sponge. I just needed to absorb it.
All right. So I'm so glad we mentioned that part because that whole I remember having this conversation. I think the first time I heard this story was we were having beers on the west side Manhattan. But I forgot all about that. Your claim the period. That's
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah, that's
yeah,
so good. All right. So how does that end and how do you transition? Because then you're going from here to your next stage at Marvel, right? Your next
yeah.
tour of duty.
Exactly. And once again, my kind of guardian angel was Jimmy Palmiotti. Like I said a few minutes ago, I was really enjoying working at Acclaim, even though like we weren't putting out many titles and they weren't selling very well. But I think because
Well,
we were
nothing
doing
was
everything.
selling well. This is
True.
like late 90s, early aughts, right? There's really no hits for
Yeah,
there
this
in this
was
period.
97, 98, 99. And yeah, I was just enjoying it so much and just kind of
Yeah.
being able to lead this small group of comics as a young person and making all the creative decisions myself. And so I was loving it. And I was like, all right, well, enough with this commuting from Jersey to Long Island. I'm going to go live in Long Island. And I move out there on a Sunday. And on Monday morning, when I get to work, the phone rings and it's Jimmy Palmiotti. And Jimmy's like, hey, I was talking to Bob Harris, then
Mm-hmm.
editor in chief at Marvel.
Yeah.
And there's an editor opening, editor spot open in the X-Men office. And if you come in and interview, it's probably yours. I was like, I'll be there tomorrow. So I go interview with Bob. I have lunch with him and two other X-Men editors, Mark Powers and Jason Liebig. And I was looking at the three of them and they were all just so exhausted. Just like there was so much work and, there's just so much stuff coming in and out of the X-Men office. And Matt Idelson had recently left Marvel for DC. So there was like a vacancy and, they needed someone to help out. And, I came on board as like the more or less the solo X-Men character editor. So I was doing Wolverine, Bishop, Gambit, Deadpool, and then I had a few other odds and ends like Black Panther and Universe X. But it was essentially like the satellite X-Men office when I came back. And this
Cool.
is like '99, so it's like the bankruptcy is over.
Right.
Ike Perlmutter is in charge, and a lot of his Toy Biz crew are there in executive positions. And then about a year after me being there, they let Bob go, which really sucked because I really loved Bob, and he was a great boss, and I learned a lot from him. But fortunately, I remember I was on vacation at the time when Bob got let go, and I was talking to my assistant, Mike Rach. I called him up. I was just like, "Hey, what's going on in the office? Everything going good?" He's like, yeah, it's okay." I'm like, "Mike, what's going on?" He's like, "Oh, nothing." I'm like, "Mike, tell me what's going on." He's like,
You're on vacation.
I don't want to ruin your vacation, right?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, Bob got let go," and I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "Well, who did they pick to be in charge?" He was like, "Joe." I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "I'm really sad that Bob is gone, but at the very least, it's not some outsider. It's not someone that I
Sure.
don't like. It's Joe." And
It's
Joe at
Joe.
that point, both Joe and Jimmy, they were working in the office as a part of Marvel Knights, but they were on the same floor as us. I was friends with both of them, and you know, the idea of Joe being in charge was very welcome to me.
Sure.
So yeah, and that that point in time, him and then very soon after, Bill Gems came in as the president, and there was that whole kind of shift in the way Marvel did things. Brian Bendis coming in to write a lot, Grant Morrison, a lot of the Marvel Knights mentality and mindset being applied to the Marvel universe as a whole.
So I, during this period, is when I first bought the comic shop that I'd been working at through most of the '90s, and I can tell you, I remember very clearly these books coming out and how incredible they were. I mean, creatively, it felt like you guys were just firing on all cylinders, right? What was
It
that like culturally and internally? What did that feel like?
it wasn't without its growing pains. The end results were always great.
Yeah.
Sales started ticking up. We were reestablishing our credibility with retailers, with readers, with creators. Because during the bankruptcy years, a lot of normal things with creators kind of broke down. Things like royalties or that sort of thing. And so there were a lot of positives, a lot of great things. We also went through 9/11 during this time period, and the company took a very immediate positive position on all that. Putting out benefit books like Heroes, and
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, it was definitely not without its growing pains, because there were some longtime Marvel people that were still on staff at the time who couldn't, or I guess didn't really accept the way that Joe and Bill wanted to run things, and that was difficult for a lot of people. And I saw, friends of mine, fellow editors, either leave voluntarily, being really disgruntled, or being let go.
Right.
And
It's a lot of
I don't think
drama, right? Because there's a
a
whole
lot,
lot of there's a
a lot
shift. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, a big shift, a lot of drama. Some of it was not fair, some of it was fair, but there was a lot of comings and goings during this point in time, and a very big shift. Not only in the talent that was coming in, people that Joe was bringing in, but also a shift in the way the stories were told. We Marvel went to kind of shifting to doing pinup covers for most of the covers of the books as opposed to story related covers. We started writing for the trade paperback in 4 or 5 issue story arcs.
Right.
And in the years before that, the trade paperback program had kind of been neglected. So now it was coming back full force, and that necessitated a change in the way that stories were told. So there was a lot of shifts, and I think those of us who could kind of keep up with it or didn't mind it or could roll with it and go with the flow, it ended up being a better thing. And for better or for worse, I was one of those people that kind of could bend and go with the flow and adapt. And eventually, um, you know, my predecessors in the X-Men office, the main X-Men office, got let go, and I was able to. Joe kind of handed me the reins and said, it's time. We want to make you the main X-Men editor.
And during that period, you do, I think, like I said earlier, X-Men has never been really my personal jam, but you did two of my personal favorite X-Men stories, the Morrison New X-Men and Whedon's Astonishing X-Men. Those were incredible books. In fact, I was reminded this morning of the New X-Men logo, because in the yoga studio that I go to almost every day, at the floor it says men, and it does, like, with the block letters. And as I'm walking past it upside down, I'm like, that says new, right? Oh, I totally forgot all about that. Yeah.
Adam, we are on some weird same wavelength, because I was thinking about that logo, no kidding, this morning.
What?
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, it's one of those logos. Hopefully, if we remember, I'd love to put this into the show notes, because it's like a palindrome, in that you flip it over and it's the same logo upside down.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, you can
See
kind
that.
of make that. Yeah, I can see that. And New X-Men.
Yeah.
Incredible. Hey, where does this come from? Because I'd love, if there's a story here, I'd love to document it.
Well, so I mean, we should note that Grant and Frank Whiteley came on to New X-Men when it was still in the office previous to me. So
Right.
I can't take credit for bringing Grant in. But I definitely came onto the books, maybe about a year into Grant's run, and stayed with Grant for the rest of his run. And what was your question?
That logo, I'd love to
The
hear
logo.
about the design.
So I believe that was sketched out by Grant.
Wow.
Grant is actually a quite a talented artist himself, and when a lot of times when Grant would write a plot, oftentimes, like, a sketch would accompany it, like, for whatever they thought the cover should be,
Right.
or what a specific character should look like. And I believe the logo, the initial design, was done by Grant.
What an incredible talent. And also so many incredible stories, even behind the scenes, about Grant. I'd love to do some sort of celebration of that at some point. He's so let's talk about, you're talking about that. Tell me about the partnership between an editor and a writer, because I was recently having dinner with another writer, and was talking about working with one of the two big studios, one of the two big publishers, and I was saying, so, talking about a project that's coming up that he just agreed to. How are you? Are you working that with the editor? Not really. I'll just bring it to them. Like, is there interaction? Not really. They know I can do it, and so I bring it to them. And I'm like, are there notes? Yeah, not really. Now, this was so beyond me, because every project I've ever been involved in, even with some really incredible, like, big name writers, there's
Right.
always that back and forth. There's always that conversation,
Right.
right? So talk a little bit about the editor's role, or your role in that. Like, what is that like, and how much does that adjust depending on who you're dealing with?
Every writer is different. Every writer is their own personality, and they have their own strengths and weaknesses and their own personality. Learning to work with each writer is a different experience each time. It's really important to be on the same page and to understand where the writer wants to go, what type of story they want to tell, definitely where they're leading, and you can help them get there in the best way possible. Notes will vary from writer to writer. With most scripts that I review, even to this day, there's structural things. There's, maybe you want to change this into a page turn, or maybe you want to take these 2 pages and make them into a double page spread, or it might work better if this reveal happens 2 pages later or 2 pages earlier. So there's notes like that. In my time working with Grant, Grant's there are many, many talented writers, then there are gifted writers. Grant is a gifted writer. He sends something in and it's beyond belief. A lot of my notes with Grant at the time were more continuity based or history based. Like, oh, we can't have Red Robin showing up here on this page because he's actually, stuck in the bottom of a pit in his own book.
Right.
That's that sort of thing. Or, we can't have Colossus appearing because he's dead. So,
right. For now.
that type of note. Yeah. And with each writer is receptive to notes in a different way. Some of them are like, bring it on, let me know, like, I need help. Scott Snyder, another gifted writer, but I worked with him for years, and Scott was always like, as soon as he sent it in, he was like, let me know what you think, and I would. And a lot of times there might be a note here that was important, and he was able to bring it in and incorporate it, and he was happier with the story and where it ended up. There's other writers where, like Joss Whedon, you mentioned before, Astonishing X-Men, another gifted writer, a script would come in and it was pristine. There was honestly nothing to do with it. Nothing to do, nothing to improve. It was just as perfect as can be. Not even like punctuation problems. And that very, very rarely happens. But fortunately with Joss Whedon, it did happen.
Right.
Because I feel like if there were notes, I would have felt like...
Because you didn't want to have that fight?
Right, like, I'm going to tell Joss Whedon how to do his job. Nah, not really. So luckily, his scripts were beyond pristine. But you have to be on the same page. You have to develop a good rhythm because you're working with these people, not just week to week, but day to day. And you have to know how to approach each of them in a unique way where whatever message you're trying to impart is going to come across as constructive and helpful and isn't going to set things back.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And it fits with the experiences that I've had. You said something earlier I want to come back to, and I think I know what it is you meant by it, but you used a shortcut where you said a can't must moment. Can you expound on that? Because I don't think I've ever heard it referred to as that.
Yeah, so it's a story device made popular in Marvel Comics, and I wish I knew if it was Stanley or if it was Jim Shooter that actually came up with it, but I know that Jim Shooter, during his time at Marvel Comics, it was something extremely important that he would enforce with his editorial staff and with the writers.
That's right. I'm remembering some of Jim's rules now. I'd forgotten about those. Yeah.
And it would really come down to decision making with the protagonist, with the hero, where something would seem impossible. I can't possibly defeat Doc because my hands are tied behind my back. But I must, because not only do I have to defeat Doc Ock, but I have to go get Aunt May's medication so that she's okay.
Right.
And the true Marvel hero would find a way to do everything in a very creative, organic way that didn't seem forced or shoehorned in. So that was the challenge that a writer would receive in Marvel Comics.
Cool.
Yeah.
Earlier, we were talking about little teenage Mike sending in his pitches. And I think you've said, I don't know if you said here, but you definitely said elsewhere that you were obsessed with like X-Men and Claremont's X-Men. Were you ever able to get any of Little Mike's ideas in during this period? Did any of them surface?
No,
No.
no. The ones that stand out in my head, I remember I had a good Silver Surfer idea, and I had this Defenders idea, which was it was very aggressive at the time. Like Marvel Comics Presents had gotten up and running, which was like the weekly
Sure.
anthology book,
Yeah, I remember
and
those. Yeah.
I had concocted a Defender storyline that would run in Marvel Comics Presents for like 10 chapters. So 10 chapters of 8 pages. So like 80 pages worth of story, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
typed out the entire thing, and I would
Of
have
course.
loved to have seen that happen, but it didn't happen.
Do you still have any of those?
Maybe.
Oh, I
I
hope you
do.
do.
I do have some files around here with some old stuff, but I'm not sure because like at the time I was typing them out on a typewriter and I wasn't saving them.
Right. Right. Well, so during this period, you're essentially, you're editing these. You're essentially leading this group, right? And you'd mentioned earlier that Bob Harris was a hero for you, and you talked about when when he got laid off. Can you talk about why? What was it about Bob? Like, was it just because he was the first that you saw in that lead role, or was there something special?
Definitely something special. I mean, Bob came on to the X-Men books. Of course, when Claremont was still writing, and I think around like the Silvestri era. Um, from the perspective of an astute reader, someone who's really reading and absorbing these books, you could tell that they were being steered in a certain direction. And when the summer crossover, the big crossover became popular and something that would return, whether it was the fall of the mutants or the mutant massacre or, later on the extinction agenda, you could see that there was coordination taking place across multiple books within this little pocket of the Marvel Universe that the X-Men and the mutants existed within. So I always admired Bob, not only for, to edit what I thought were the best comics in the business, but acquiring the best talent, realizing that Jim Lee and Will Spartaccio and Larry Stroman and Joe Quesada, were the right people to draw these books, along with the writers, of course. But, being able to do that and also just manage the whole thing and have continuity, be consistent from book to book, storyline to storyline. After becoming an editor and, managing books like the X-Men, you realize it's not as easy as it looks. It certainly comes with sets of challenges. And now, like, retrospectively, I can look back and I can see, oh, Bob probably had a challenge here. He probably had a challenge there. But to a young person, a young editor, a young writer, he made it look easy. And I remember when I became the main X-Men editor, Bob, I don't know if he was doing freelance at the time or if he was at DC, but he lived near me. And I remember, like, I offered, hey, can I just take you out to dinner and just pick your brain and everything? And Bob's a very modest guy. He was like, me? Why would you want to ask me? And I was like, no, Bob, you're the master. I brought him out to sushi dinner one night and just picked his brain. And I certainly picked up tips and things that would definitely help me. But I also understood that for people who like are legends and who you really look up to, I think, like, when they're in the middle of it, they're having as tough a time doing it as the rest of us.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And you don't even really know what questions to ask, right? To get that. Like, you have not had the experience at that point, right?
No, because I'm like, do you have like the secret formula to do this? What's the Kentucky Fried recipe? Like, and
no,
a lot of
no, kid. No, are you kidding me? I'm just trying to make sure that nobody figures out I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. Thanks for the sushi, though. All right. So at some point, you get the call to go to DC. You go to Crosstown, right?
Yeah.
Who makes that call? Is that Dan?
So yeah, Dan and I had become friendly. Like every year there'd be the Marvel DC softball game, and at that point in time, I would coach the Marvel team a little bit, and Dan was always coach of the DC team. So we became friendly that way. And also, we both lived in Jersey, so anytime there was a convention, whether it was Chicago or San Diego or whatever, we usually found ourselves on the same flight
Yeah,
and
at
would
Newark. Yeah,
in Newark and would
yeah,
inevitably, chat, you know, while we're waiting for the flight to board. And then once we even like sat across from each other, um, you know,
right.
so I became pretty friendly with Dan. And at that time, even though, Marvel was firing on all cylinders, but DC suddenly was surprising people. It was
Yeah,
Identity Crisis and Villains United, and Dan was bringing in writers to really boost up the DC characters. Jeff Johns was in his prime. Dan was stealing some talent from Marvel. So suddenly, like DC was becoming a player again, and there was something really attractive about that energy and that excitement. And Dan had called me up one day, and I kind of felt like I think he's asking to interview me, and sure. And so this led to an interview with him, and then it also led to an interview with Paul Levitz, um, and ended up becoming Dan's first editorial hire, like since he had been there. Um, and at that point in time in Marvel, I'd been there for 7 years. I rose up to be the main X-Men editor, which is what I wanted to be. I kind of left the books in a really sweet spot. I had just hired Ed Brubaker and Mike Carey to write the books, and I was like, I feel like they're in good hands and they're safe.
yeah,
And at the time, even though I was a senior editor at Marvel, um, there was a few people ahead of me, on the totem pole. There was Ralph Macchio, there's Axel Alonso, there's Tom Brevoort, and I know each of those guys were ahead of me, and
and they're not going to
just
leave until they want to.
exactly right. And
Tom's still there.
I felt I'm still there, right?
Yeah,
Um, for my own personal advancement as an
yeah.
editor and everything, it felt like the right move to take. And I didn't know going in that I was going to become the Batman editor. I just knew I was going over to DC to edit, and the first few weeks I was editing a few things, and I was kind of like, I don't feel like this is my real assignment or my eventual assignment. I feel like this is just kind of like a waiting game, or I'm just kind of like
Y'all are keeping me busy until whatever the next thing is, right? Yeah.
exactly. And what I didn't know at the time was that Peter Tomasi, who was the current Batman editor, was planning to leave and go freelance full time as a writer. And so a few months in, of course, Pete leaves, and Dan knights me to become the Batman group editor.
Well, excellent. Well, I don't. We can spend more time here if you'd like, but I do only have a couple questions about your time at DC. Can you talk about Dan as a leader? You've talked a lot about other folks. It's he's still around. He's still in our industry. He's still in our circles, out there punching.
He is. Yeah, he's doing writing work for us at Mad Cave right now.
Oh yeah, right on.
Yep. Dan. Dan to me, I've been really, really lucky in my career to have great bosses. Whether it's Harris, Joe Quesada, Dan Buckley, but Dan to me is really one of my top favorites. Dan has energy. He has excitement. He has passion.
Yeah.
It never wavers. Never. And sometimes he has passion to a fault, and he knows that. And Dan sometimes can be a little controversial with the creative community. Not everyone who works with Dan leaves happy. You know,
There are plenty of stories. If you work in comics, there are plenty of stories about Dan being passionate. That's for sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
But for me, he was the type of boss that I needed. I could go down to his office any hour of the day, any day of the week, and no matter what he was doing, he would put it down and come in, talk to me, whether it was about story, creators, the job, home. He was always available, always there. And what I loved about him is that he was just unafraid to take chances and to take risks. Um, and though in the long run, the New 52 didn't end up being as successful as we had envisioned it.
Yeah.
Creating the New 52 with Dan and a few other people was just an invigorating experience.
So I did want to, I mean, before we leave DC, I did want to talk about New 52 specifically, because I find it to be just a fascinating idea and a fascinating experiment, both in storytelling and marketing. Like you guys were really swinging for the fences on that one. And I think that is commendable no matter what the outcome. So for, just to, not to make this all about my experience, but I will say that I've been in writer rooms, like retreats, where I think the fascinating thing for me is that people come in the room and they say, okay, here's a problem we're trying to solve. And you have all of these writers that are trying to tell a story to fix the problem, which that idea of storytelling, problem solving with storytelling, I find to be wonderfully inspiring. And it feels, I mean, I always wondered if that's how something like this comes together, or is this like just you and Dan, or like, what if we did something like this? Can you talk just a minute about how does that get conceptualized? When do you bring in the outside talent? Like, how does that all shape?
I mean, the idea of doing this major reset and starting things from scratch, I know was with Dan even before I came to DC. Because when I got to DC, I was there for maybe like, I don't know, 2 weeks. And he called a few of us into the conference room and he was talking about something that resembled what New 52 would eventually become. We weren't calling it New 52, but he was talking about this reset and everything. So that idea was with him for a while. And for whatever reason, couldn't get off the ground at that point. But a few years later, the timing was right. And I guess he got the go-ahead from Paul Levitz. And there was months of working on this. We had this little room with no windows called the War Room, which Dan had the only key to. It was locked all the time. And there was a big, like, bulletin board. And we had hundreds of different index cards. And each index card was either a different writer, a different artist, or a different character or book. And we spent days just putting, Batman up on the board and a writer-artist combo. Does that work? I don't know. Teen Titans, a different writer-artist combo. And we did that for a long time. There were more than 52 characters and ideas. We had to pare it down and figure out what the 52 characters were going to be. We had to figure out which ones fit in each family. There was 4 group editors at the time, and each, there was going to be 13 books with each editorial family, and then we had to start it, and we started it while still finishing up, the books that were coming before it. So we had to get this huge head start, this huge lead start, which was really tough because you were asking certain artists to leave their books early so they could start on the New 52. You were asking writers to write double in 1 month what they normally would so that you could get ahead. But somehow, we pulled it off. And I think with very few exceptions, like the first few months of New 52, there wasn't any book that shipped late. And that went on like that for a long time, which was a great place to be in. Because with an initiative this large and this risky, you needed to make retailers happy and readers happy. And, sales were fantastic.
Absolutely.
The company the company was nervous about New 52 going in, and then the sales numbers came in and they rallied behind it. They were all for it. But, I think like anything, to be successful in the long term, you got to stick with it. And I left DC when New 52 was still going on. And then, at some point, a year or two after that, it was abandoned for the next thing. I forget what, rebirth, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
that's tough. That's tough to hear.
It's tough. It's tough. But, in this day and age, I mean, especially with the big two companies, there's always this push internally in the companies to do these resets or restarts. And
yeah, well, because that's where the money comes in, and it brings people back. Okay, so 2014, 2015, you move back to Marvel, and now as executive editor on All New Marvel Now. And I want to talk just a little bit because I want to definitely have time to go into your next chapter here. But I do want to talk about how you're once again returning to the culture, because I think that's really interesting that you have in that three separate places, three distinct moments in Marvel's history. How does this period work as the cultural? I mean, now that you're under Ike, and it's I don't know how many. Well, someday we'll get into all the stories about Ike, but how does it feel? Because you're not there very long this time.
I'm not, no. And I mean, it was a difficult time for me personally. I thought I'd be at DC forever. I was extremely happy with my role there, with everything that I was doing. And the idea that the company was kind of upending itself and moving out to California threw a major monkey wrench into my life plans.
Yeah. You don't want to move to Burbank. Yeah.
No, I didn't. There were parts of me that did, but I had a house out here, had child, my family was nearby. There were too many things here that were necessitating me to stay. So I needed to leave, and I didn't want to, but I had always kept my relationships at Marvel strong. I never burned bridges. I always stayed in touch and was friendly. And I'd reached out to Dan Buckley, and I just asked him if there was potentially anything that would be open. And as it was also kind of serendipitous, like Steve Wacker, who had been at Marvel the whole time I was at DC, was leaving to go to the West Coast to start a new job in animation and film. And there was a senior editorial spot open. So Dan and Joe were able to bring me back as executive editor, which to me was a huge honor. The chessboard had been shuffled since the last time I was there. Axel Alonso was editor-in-chief. Tom Brevoort was executive editor, and I was coming in, kind of right underneath Tom in the pecking order, which to me was a great. DC. I don't know if I've ever told this story before, yes, but DC was definitely trying to get me to stay too, and to get me to come out to California, and I ended up getting an offer letter from both companies to be executive editor on the same day.
That's gotta feel good. That's gotta feel
it was
real
kind of
good.
crazy. Yeah. Dan Buckley, from Marvel letter from Marvel, and it was Jim Lee who called me. I remember I was on the bus and wanted to offer me the executive editor spot at DC, and I had to turn down DC, obviously, but I went back to Marvel, and the culture there, I definitely changed to me a lot. I'm sure for the people who were there and in the trenches and working their day to day, it was very gradual. And
sure.
It was just their way of doing things. But
the frog
to me,
slowly boiled, right? Yeah.
To me, it was tough. It was difficult. I tried fitting in. I never really felt like I kind of fit back in. I tried hard. I loved the books I was working on. Working on X-Men again, working at Guardians of the Galaxy at the same time the movie was coming out. Getting to work with Brian Bendis on 3 different books, like it was that aspect of it was great. But whatever Marvel had become, and I don't know if it was the Ike of it all, because I was certainly used to Ike and my past time there. It could have been the Disney aspect of it,
Sure.
because Disney had bought Marvel while I was gone. It could have been just the shuffling of chairs, the rearranging of chairs, and who was there on staff. I don't know what it was, but it was not the happiest of times for me.
I get that.
And this is going to sound weird. It's going to sound really weird, but like I always feel like the physical space in which you work contributes a lot to your work health and your mental health. And my out of all the editors, I think on Editor's Row, my office was the only one that could not see a sliver of sunlight like through like the glass wall. Like I just couldn't, like no matter where I was in the office, no matter where I positioned my desk, I couldn't see sunlight, and I really felt claustrophobic and trapped in there, and it was dark. And typical Marvel mentality. I was sharing the office with a few people, so we're all kind of
Sure.
crammed in there. So I think I knew inside it wasn't
Didn't it fit?
quite the right fit for me that time. And I just an opportunity came along which kind of solved those problems for me. I didn't have to get to the point of me making a tough decision one way or the other.
You didn't have to ask. You didn't have to stay. I'm gonna. It's time to go.
Right.
Well, before we get to that, I want to take one more opportunity here because we're about to shift into a real change in your work anyway. So before we leave, let's do that core sample again. So we've done this twice now. We've done this with assistant editor Mike. We've done this after your first round of editing at Marvel, Mike. And now you've been executive editor, Mike. What is your appreciation of editing? What is that? Like, is there a fuller appreciation? Do you have a fuller definition at this point?
I mean, at this point, it's a lot of times I use like the sports analogy, and I go to maybe like a baseball manager, someone managing a baseball team. At this point, it's more than just the mechanics of the job that you're concerned with. It's the people that are working for you, because as either a senior group or executive editor, most likely you have a staff working with you, a group of assistants, associate, regular editors. And I had that at both DC and Marvel. And, the job at that point takes on new levels. Part of it is managerial, managing your staff, getting the best out of them. Some of it's education, because, editing comics and making comics, it happens so fast that a lot of times there's not enough time to step back and say, what's the best way of doing this? How do we do this? How has it been done traditionally in the past? What's the history of this? And that's something that really takes
why do
seriously.
We do it this way? Yeah.
Right. That's an aspect of the job I take really seriously. And I try to educate my editors as best I can wherever I'm working. So the job certainly takes on that type of role. And then you're kind of thinking about it less as like individual titles that you're working on and more as a franchise or a family or your own little like mini publishing company. And I thought about it that way in my last few years at DC with the Batman books, and I certainly thought about it like that at Marvel with the X-Men books. You think about things as like a publishing unit. How can I get the best sales out of it? What's the right creative lineup to get attention? How can we make these books interact to the point where people appreciate the interaction but aren't frustrated by it?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, looking at the baseball manager, I think there's so many different things that they're doing. They're also looking for tomorrow's talent sitting on the bench, or when it's draft day,
Right.
who's going to be good coming up onto the team and working with us, and also how to get the best out of your veteran all stars, before they have to retire.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good. All right, so you leave. So you get a call from I'm gonna guess
Mr.
Joe.
Pruitt.
Mr.
Yes.
Pruitt.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he says, I got these two guys, Lee and John. They want to make a publishing company. Did I get that right?
That's pretty much how it went. Yeah, Joe was a friend of mine. I had used him a few times when I was X-Men editor. He was a writer for me, and we always stayed chummy. We saw each other at conventions, and we'd share a beer or whatever. And he called me up, and he said, "By the way, I want you to know you're not my first phone call. My first phone call turned me down." I was like, "All right, thanks."
Do you know who it was?
I do. I'm not going to say on this, but I'll tell you later.
That's fine.
Yeah. So, yeah, Joe basically said, "Hey, I've been working with these guys out in California, and they're looking to create a company. We're a small staff now, but we're looking to do creator-owned comics." He mentioned he had a few creators already interested, like Paul Jenkins, Garth Ennis, and they were looking for someone to essentially be editor-in-chief and kind of help Joe run creative. So Joe was going to be publisher and I'd be editor-in-chief. And the same stuff I was telling you before about kind of running a small publishing unit. It was all that type of stuff, which was, I guess, leading me to this next step where I think I should go in my career, and essentially to start a company from scratch. And that's what we did. I would say they flew me out to meet everyone in February. I think I started in April, and our first books were on the stands in December, I think.
Wow. That's impressive. That is an impressive turnaround.
Yeah. It was a lot of
I've told
quick.
more than one publisher who came to me and said, "Hey, we want to be on shelves by July." And I'm like, "Okay, well, it's November. When did you start? Oh, we haven't started yet." It's not. No, it's just a no. But I've had that conversation more than a few times. So you guys turned that around. That's really impressive. All right, so I know what so just to bring the viewers up to speed, during this period, we had COVID. My team at Prana, we came on to sell retailer exclusive covers with you guys, and we were on weekly meetings all through COVID, which was the birth of the Zooms, and I do believe it was your lead to have. I think we had a trivia night every few weeks during that period.
Yeah, that did happen. Yeah, that was my idea.
Yep. Yeah, I think I came in second because Charles Pritchett is a machine. He is insanely good at trivia. I'm not sure if he's good at trivia or if he's just really good at Googling. But Charles, love you.
Charles.
Well, we love you, buddy. What are your highlights? I know what mine are, but what are your highlights of your time at Aftershock? What are the things that you carry with you?
The creators. There's so many good people came through the doors to do books at Aftershock. Whether it was veterans like I mentioned before, Paul and Garth Ennis, to kind of people coming into the industry new. Donnie Cates was still a newish name when he came and worked for us. Zach Thompson and Lonnie Nadler. Marguerite Bennett was still, in the first year or two of her career when she started working with us. The books, very proud of them, and the creators, just working with them day in and day out was awesome. And really just creating something from scratch. You
Yeah.
know, none of us really had a blueprint beyond just like our each individual respective experiences. So I took everything I learned from Marvel and DC and everywhere else, and just tried to apply it to making comics at Aftershock. And there was a lot of hard lessons, a lot of tough lessons. I think looking back in hindsight, it would have been smarter to do more than just create our own comics. I don't think a company can really go the long haul just by doing one thing.
Right.
I think you really, unless you're Marvel or DC, but there's only two of them. Everyone else, I think you really have to diversify and offer different types of product to different types of buyers.
Oh, would you say? I mean, is there anything else? Like, I know that. So, the Mad Cave really does, in many ways, feel like an extension of that. Like, there's a number. There's a number of the publishers that are like what we were doing at Aftershock that are places like Vault. Anybody who's doing a lot of creator-owned, like self-contained stories, not a universe. They're building up a library of IP. Well, I mean, people will refer to them as IP farms, and truthfully, maybe that's not a bad understanding, because it is about growing something from scratch, and it is about like harvesting it and using it and getting the best out of it. What? So, how much of that, like, were the guy who came out of Marvel the third time is not ready to go into Mad Cave, right? So, what else do you
No,
bring from that experience?
no, yeah, I had to go through the aftershock experience, which was um, a lot of victories and successes, but also there were failures or low points along the way, and they were all learning experiences, and they were learning experiences in a with more at stake, because if something if something goes wrong at Marvel or DC, certainly there are repercussions, but it's not like a mistake isn't made and then the company goes out of business.
Right.
And you're also, you're dealing with Disney's money or Warner Brothers money, okay? But at a company like Aftershock or Vault or, whoever, you're dealing with a smaller purse, and every cent that you spend is an important cent. So every single decision that you do at a company like that, there's more at stake. There's much more
Yeah.
thought process that goes into it. And without doing that at Aftershock and making mistakes, winning sometimes, some successes, um, I couldn't roll into the role that I had at Man Cave without kind of gone through that process first. Trial and error, high stakes.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Before we leave this area of your life, and I appreciate you taking the time. We're now at 1:43, and I'm just now entering Mad Cave territory. But before we do that, I do want to take a step back, because we're in COVID times,
Yeah.
and I went through that with you. Uh,
Yep.
and rather than get into what everybody else dealt with, I want to talk about you returning to your alma mater of Dope University and ask you, who or what is the Ninja Nine?
Man, how did you get this stuff? You must have. So when I was a kid, when I was a teenager,
Uh-huh.
even before teenager, I was a hardcore rap guy. I mean,
Really?
rap. Oh, big time. I mean, when it first started coming on the scene and everything, Run DMC, LL Cool J, Curtis Blow. Like I was just like, that was my life. Much like comics is, and it was the same time that I got into comics. Um, but like, rap music was my life, and it was hard to find at the time. You couldn't just go out to any
Mm-mm.
record store and find it. I had to go to like a town like 4 towns over that was a little more urban, and that's where I could find stuff.
I
And
remember very clearly hearing the digital planets for the first time and thinking, I don't even know how to find this again.
That's
I'm
right.
just gonna have to listen to the radio. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many times I would see like a tape at the store and it looked like it might be rap, and I would just pick it up sight unseen without listening to it and
Just in
buy it.
case.
Right.
Yeah.
Just in case. But anyway, so I totally got into that, and I taught myself how to DJ, and I bought 2 turntables, a mixer, I had a drum machine, I had a reverb box, I had microphones, and I would create my own music, through the 2 turntables and the drum machine, and me and another friend of mine, who he was also kind of equally into it. We would write songs and we would perform them and record them, and at that time we called ourselves the Dope University. So it was DJ Micah Rock, that was me, and my friend K Fierce. So there was 2 of us.
DJ Mike a Rock?
Micah Rock. DJ Micah Rock, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So anyway, like I did this throughout most of high school. I was the guy who would create DJ mixes and put them on tapes and give them to people out at high school. Like everyone wanted a DJ Micah Rock mixtape. So yeah, I did that. I always loved it, and I don't then flash forward many years to COVID times, and it's the first summer of COVID, and trying to figure out ways to express myself creatively. And first, I built this bookshelf here,
okay,
and put that up, and then put all the books in. That was one way to kind of get the creative energies going. But I needed more, and I had this thing called GarageBand sitting on my computer, and every once in a while I'd go in and just kind of mess around with it. But I decided I'm just going to go full in and just try to make some music. And I think in my head I kind of envisioned I was going to create something that was like part Beastie Boys, part Tool, part Nine Inch Nails. It didn't actually become that. It was kind of like more like a DJ Shadow or Uncle type of thing.
Okay.
A lot of sampling, a lot of loops. But I just started creating music, and I taught myself how to create music on GarageBand by watching tutorials and YouTube videos. Sure. And I started taking Run the Jewels songs and I reverse engineered them. Like I would listen to them and I'd break down all the different tracks, and then I would take that and try to apply it to what I was doing. And then I just, I started putting together what felt like an album.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm just gonna come up with a name for this group. And I thought like, all right, I'm gonna kind of take the Gorillaz route and just kind of create this fictitious band. And I created the Ninja Nine. So it's a group of 9 individuals, and each one has a different musical specialty. And there are these 9 people who make this music together. And one of the characters is DJ Micah Rock. But I went and I had Russ Wooten, who was a big industry letterer. He designed the logo for me, and Wando designed the characters for me. So he
what?
Yeah. So then like I got the first album out. I mixed it, mastered it, put it all together, put it up on iTunes and Spotify, and then a few months later I did a second album. And then maybe about a year after that, I did 2 like DJ albums. Like it was almost like I was at a club just like playing music for like 2 hours, and I was mixing from one beat to the next. And I did 2 albums like that. And then I had a kid.
And that shit will stop everything in its tracks. Yeah.
I mean, I have 2 daughters, girl dad. And one's a teenager and she's doesn't require much entertainment. She can entertain herself. But, when I had the baby a few years ago, it was like a year into COVID, that suddenly sucked up all my free time. So
Yeah, it'll do.
there
It'll
hasn't
do
been
that.
much progress with the Ninja 9 during that time.
Well, I went looking. I couldn't find it. So if you
What?
can, I
It's
know.
on, yeah, it's on Apple
It's on,
Music and it's on Spotify.
all right, Will you send me links? I want to make sure to put it in the show notes because
Yeah,
especially
no
if
problem.
you've got some Wando art in there. All right, before we leave, I'm gonna give me your top 3 new musicians, newest artists you've fallen in love with recently.
Okay, well, I mean, they're not like incredibly new, but like Lord Huron is great.
Yeah,
I mean, they probably got like 5 or 6 albums out. I saw them last year. They're sensational. Uh, Run the Jewels is new to me. I know they're not necessarily new, but
they are amazing. Yeah,
I brought them into my life during COVID, and I'm devoted at this point. And I'm trying to think who else. Well, for new, well, Angel Olsen is also kind of new to me, but um,
I don't
I
actually
love.
know Angel Olsen, so
Oh,
there
Angel
you go.
Olsen's great, and Sharon Van Etten too is also
All
sensational.
right, all
Yeah.
right, awesome. All right, great. Okay, now now that we've done that, you're at Mad Cave now. You've been there for a little bit. Tell me about how is Mad Cave different? So I was talking earlier about these IP companies, right? And Mad Cave feels like on its surface that it's one of those, but I also know it. I did a little bit of work for Mad Cave right before you got the job,
Hmm.
so we never overlapped there. But what drew you there, and what what is it that makes it unique?
So, Mad Cave to me, it's funny. Like Mad Cave was very similar to Aftershock in that it was the little engine that could started small, was growing, and occasionally at some of the shows like New York Comic Con, we would see those guys. I would see the Mad Cave guys, and they were like a few booths over,
Yeah,
and always friendly to each other, and because you're kind of going through the same thing.
you're in the same journey, right?
Right, right, exactly. So I was always aware of the company because of that, because they were kind of in the same boat what I was experiencing at Aftershock. The thing that changed and really, in my mind, elevated them and put them on the map was when they acquired Paper Cuts, which was 2 years
Right.
ago. And Paper Cuts was, I mean, a legit middle grade publisher. People like Jim Salicrup, and it was, um, you know, to me that was a very serious acquisition. It told me that Mad Cave had chutzpah. They had the balls to go out and do something like that. Um, and that, in my mind, my opinion of them changed overnight, and I really took them seriously. And then through a mutual acquaintance, Gamal Hennessy, who a lot of people know as one of the industry's big attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
Gamal,
I work with Gamal. He's
yeah,
I've got a couple contracts he's written for me. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So Gamal also did my legal work for the Ninja 9.
Good to know.
But but
Multi-talented.
yes, he connected Mark London and I, and Mark London was the same, not the same, but very similar to Dan DiDio in terms of energy, passion, and taking risks.
Yeah.
Not channeled the same way. They're two very different people personality wise, but just from the position of someone who's just so passionate, not just about their own creations, but about their company and the industry as a whole and what's possible.
Right.
And you meet Mark and you start talking to him, and just like Dan DiDio, it's you become infected in a good way. And I was talking to him, and um, there was an opportunity within their company um, for an editor-in-chief position, and it was a relatively quick process. I mean, I feel like maybe we talked on a Tuesday, and by Friday, I was signing a contract. And
Wow.
and again, just
That
like kind of like when I left Marvel to go to DC, like I felt like at Aftershock I'd done everything that I wanted to do and everything I set out to do, and it was time for me to take the next step in my career to evolve.
yeah.
And what makes Mad Cave different from any other place that I've worked is what I was kind of talking about earlier, their diversification of product that's available. Because certainly they had the creator owned thing going on, which was similar to Aftershock, and even working with some of the same creators. But that was just a section of what they were doing. They had a whole other group of comics geared towards the teen plus audience that were developed in house and then farmed out to outside talent. As soon as I got there, they told me about certain licenses that they were looking to acquire, and they didn't want to go crazy with licenses. They wanted to make
Right.
strategic decisions about a few that really mattered and that could make a difference. Those are things like Dick Tracy, Flash Gordon, Gotcha Man, the ones that we released over the past few months. Um, on the paper cut side, you have a whole publishing unit that's devoted to product for middle grade kids. So that was something new, and it's not just like one or two books; it's a whole line, and that came with popular license within it, whether it was Asterix or Smurfs or Loud House. And these days, we our newly acquired license of Disney. Then there's Maverick, which is our young adult line, appealing to a whole another cross section of readership. So, and to be honest, that's I don't want to say it's like the tip of the iceberg, but there's more to come.
Yeah.
There's more to come. People going to San Diego next week. There's a big announcement coming there, and people will never see it coming. Never see it coming. And there's more things that we're developing. So, what makes Mad Cave different is that at our heart, we are a publishing company that specializes in graphic storytelling, but the format can change, can be different, and the audience can be different. So we're really trying to create stories for everyone.
Well, that's a lofty goal. You now have a pretty broad. You've been through this a couple times, and I would say anybody who's putting together a list of experts on this question, you would have to have you in it. What do you think the future of comics, creator-owned comics as intellectual property, right? The way that we know it, of taking what is seemingly is relatively an inexpensive way of getting IP generated and getting it into the world and creating a fan base and giving an opportunity to exploit it elsewhere. What do you think the future of that as a business model looks like? If you
I
have any
think
opinions.
I do. Yeah. It's always going to be an extremely part of our business. And this goes back to when popular Marvel and DC creators left and started doing their own thing in the 70s and 80s with Eclipse Comics and First Comics. You were following a certain writer or artist because of their voice, because of their vision, and that's still going strong. And the biggest examples, Robert Kirkman, Brian Vaughan. So there's always going to be a call for that and a need for it. I think recently the industry as a whole is still kind of coming out of whatever COVID did to the industry, and I don't even know if we've fully understood what happened. But stuff happened, and I feel the comics publishing industry is still rebounding from that and adapting and trying to figure out where we're going to go from here. Creator comics will remain an important part, but what route is it going to take? Is it going to be best served through traditional publishers like us at Mad Cave and Image? Is crowdfunding, Kickstarter, a better route or a more popular route? It's really tough to say at this point. But what's refreshing is that the need is still there. People are still following creators' voices and don't really care what company they're at or what characters they're playing with. They just want to follow those creators and get their next project.
Hey, I think it's really, really well said. All right, so I have only a few more. We're going over on time, and I appreciate you taking your time out of your family time with us. So while we're talking about the role of the editor, and that has been kind of a theme for this evening, as what an editor is, there's a bit of controversy surrounding what, if any, creator credit editors deserve. I don't want to get too far into the story of Wolverine and how that affects this, but as someone who has touched literally every rung on the ladder of editor, can you speak to this controversy? Do you have a point of view as to what do you deserve? Right?
I definitely have a point of view, and my thoughts and my opinions are coming at it from a more general viewpoint. Editors and their roles with characters that might be created under their purview or while they're working on a certain set of books. With the Wolverine Roy Thomas story, most everyone's familiar with it, and I can't claim to be close to or involved in any of the conversations that took place between Roy and Marvel, either today, in this day and age, or back in the 70s when Wolverine was created. What I can say is that having been an editor for 20 years within the two mainstream superhero publishers, whether it's Marvel or DC, 8 years at DC, 13 years at Marvel combined, the role of the editor is very much behind the scenes. All credit goes to the creator. If something works and is great with a book, praise and credit go to the creator. If something is wrong and something gets broke, that's on the editor's desk. It falls to them. So the buck stops with the editor. We're not in it for glory. We're not in it for accolades. We're here to get the job done. And this is something that was taught to me my first year at Marvel. People like Mark Grunwald, who was a longtime editor there, he would have an assistant editor class every week, and we would learn. And this was something that was taught to editors at Marvel. We're not there to become popular. We're there to get the best people to work on the books and to get the job done. Anything that's created on books that we work on, first and foremost, if it's work for hire, which most everything at Marvel DC is, it belongs to the company first, like or not. Okay. And that's just, people going in, they know they sign a work for hire contract. It belongs to the company.
Right.
That being said, both Marvel and DC have been extremely generous over the years. Not early on, but
sure.
In the 80s, when people like Jim Shooter and others were fighting for creative rights, from that point forward, Marvel and DC have credited the creation of character when possible, and at other times the creator of that character can be entitled to extra royalties if they created a certain character and they get their own title. And there's usually not any type of like, thing in that contract that says like, hey, if that character appears in the movie, you'll get money. But
Yeah.
a lot of times they do, and sometimes either Marvel or DC can take care of a creator that way. Obviously, it's not a perfect system. It's been well publicized, like Jim Starlin and his struggles with Thanos, with Marvel, and
Yeah.
and that's a point where like I don't think anyone intends it to happen that way, but the character of Thanos, back in the day, only us comic nerds knew who Thanos was. Now everyone out there knows who Thanos is.
Right.
So the system, however it was designed, couldn't catch up to the popularity of Thanos and rewarding Jim in the way that he deserved to be rewarded. But Jim was the writer and artist, of Thanos. He wasn't the editor. The editor should not get credit.
Never? Is there never a point where you've put in the effort? Maybe you led someone to it. Maybe you said, "Here's the story. Really need you to do this." Never once you feel
not once. And if you ask other editors within the industry who have been around a long time, Tom Brevoort or Nick Lowe, like they would tell you the exact same thing. No, because there's been characters who have been created under my watch, who have gone on to be in movies that I helped, like Nightcrawler's father, Azazel.
Sure.
Chuck Austin created him, but Chuck Austin created him in conversations with me over the phone where we went back and forth and we were talking about his name and his look and everything like that. Did I have a part in that? Definitely. The character of Vulcan that Ed Brubaker created and became the third Summers brother. Was I part of conversations that helped develop that character and I threw in ideas? 100%. Do I deserve any credit? No. My job was editor of the X-Men. I was there to help Ed create and to help him bring ideas to life. That's my job. My job is not to get any credit or glory.
Thank you. Appreciate you clearing that up. Hi again. Thanks so much for watching Comic Industry Insiders. It, as always, is our pleasure to talk to the movers and shakers of comics and to bring you those conversations. We'd love it if you'd support us with a like and subscribe, and telling your friends is always good, but really what we'd want to do is hear from you. Any questions, any suggestions you have about our show, any suggested guests, frankly, anything at all, we'd love to hear from you. Our producer is nearly always Stephanie Gerk, and our researcher is Anthony Militano, who makes me look much smarter than I am. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Namaste, y'all.